If you want to understand 1950s Britain, don't start with the big events. Start with a Sunday, because Sundays weren't just a day off. They were a whole different version of life, slower, stricter, quieter, and shaped by rules that most people didn't even question at the time. And the weirdest part is this. If you grew up in that era, Sunday could feel comforting and suffocating in the same breath. It was a day built around family, routine, and a sense that the country should pause. But it was also a day where the outside world shut down so completely that you could feel the borders of your town. So today, let's walk through what Sundays really looked like in 1950s Britain. What people did, what they ate, what was open, what was forbidden, and what it felt like to live inside a weekly pause that modern Britain barely recognises. Picture a typical Sunday morning. The first thing you notice isn't noise, it's the lack of it. No rush hour traffic, no constant shopping, no deliveries, no buzzing high street. The street feels like it's holding its breath. In many places, shops were shut because of trading laws and cultural norms. The idea of Sunday shopping as a normal thing simply wasn't part of the week for most families. So Sunday had a different mood from the moment you woke up. Less choice, less movement, more home. And for a lot of households, the day began with something that shaped the whole decade: church. Now, not everyone went, and Britain wasn't a single religious experience. But in the 1950s, church attendance was far higher than it is today, and church shaped the rhythm of Sunday even for people who didn't go, because it shaped what was considered proper. If you did go, it was a full ritual. Best clothes, polished shoes, quiet behaviour, the walk there, the hymns. And if you were a child, the message was clear. Sunday is different. Sunday has rules. Even the way adults spoke could change. The house might feel more formal. Kids might be expected to be calmer. Noise might be corrected faster, because Sunday carried an idea that's easy to forget now: respectability. Now, here's where Sunday becomes truly specific to 1950s Britain. The lunch. Sunday lunch wasn't just a meal. It was the centre of the day, and it wasn't about fancy ingredients. It was about ritual. If a family could manage it, Sunday lunch often meant a roast. Roast beef, lamb, pork, or chicken, depending on income, region, and what was available. Roast potatoes, vegetables, gravy, and then dessert. A pudding, sometimes sponge, sometimes crumble, sometimes something simple with custard. In the 1950s, food was still influenced by wartime memory. Rationing of some items had only recently ended, and the habit of make it stretch was deeply rooted. So Sunday lunch also carried meaning. This is when we do it properly. This is when we show we're doing okay. This is when the family sits together. Because sitting together mattered more when the week was harder and life was smaller. Now think about the work behind that meal. In many homes, cooking a Sunday roast took time. Real time. Peeling, boiling, roasting, watching the oven, preparing vegetables, making gravy, keeping things warm without modern kitchen convenience. And the kitchen itself could feel like an engine room, especially for mothers and grandmothers who carried the labour of making Sunday feel like Sunday. Then came the post-lunch moment that many people remember like it was a national tradition: the Sunday afternoon slump. The meal is heavy. The house is warm. The weather outside is often grey, and suddenly the whole home falls into a slower mode. Adults sit down with tea. Kids get told to go and play or be quiet. Some families read newspapers. Some listen to the radio. And later in the decade, when television became more common, Sunday evenings began to revolve around TV schedules. But in the early to mid-1950s, entertainment was still more limited. So Sunday had a special kind of boredom, a boredom that wasn't filled by screens. If you were a kid, you remember it. You'd wonder, You'd invent games. You'd stare out the window. You'd complain you were bored. And an adult would respond like boredom was a character flaw. Because in that era, boredom wasn't treated like a problem society needed to solve. It was treated as something you endured. Now let's talk about what you couldn't do on a Sunday, because that's what makes the day feel so different. In 1950s, Britain, many leisure activities were restricted by law or social expectation. Certain entertainment venues were closed or limited. Many shops were closed. Even some sports and events had Sunday traditions or restrictions in different areas. Depending on where you lived, you might see a high street that looked almost abandoned compared to a weekday. And that created a strange effect. The day forced you inward, into the house, into the family, into the neighbourhood. For some people, that was comforting. For others, especially teenagers, it could feel like imprisonment. Because Sunday wasn't just no school, it was nowhere to go. This is one reason the phrase Sunday blues exists in memory. Not everyone called it that, but many people felt it. That slow anxiety that arrives late afternoon when you realise tomorrow is Monday. In a decade where school and work could be strict, Monday carried weight. So Sunday had this emotional arc. Morning, calm, formal, proper. Midday, food, family, ritual. Afternoon, quiet, boredom, waiting. Evening, the shadow of Monday. Now, let's zoom in on the home itself, because 1950s, Britain is also the era of one warm room. Central heating wasn't universal. Warmth was managed. Coal fires, gas heaters, thick curtains, hot water bottles. So Sundays often meant the family gathered in the warm living room, and that changes behaviour. When people share one room, they talk more, they argue more, they notice each other more. You can't escape into a different heated space. You can't disappear into your own screen world. So family life becomes more intense. Not necessarily in a bad way, but in a real way. And that's why Sundays are remembered so vividly. Because you weren't only living through the day, you were living through each other. Now think about sound, because Sundays had a soundscape. The quiet street, the clink of cups, the radio, the pages of the newspaper, the distant church bells in some places, the crackle of a fire. And if you were a child, you remember the specific tone adults used on a Sunday. Slower, more serious, more don't mess about. There was often a sense that the week had rules, and Sunday had a different set of rules on top. Now, none of this means Sundays were miserable. Many people remember them with genuine warmth. Because Sunday meant togetherness. It meant a guaranteed family meal. It meant visiting grandparents. It meant walks. Because walks were one of the few things that always fit Sunday. The Sunday walk is a very British memory. Even if the weather was miserable, families went out. Coats, scarves, short daylight, sometimes a park, sometimes the countryside, sometimes just a walk, because that was what you did. And those walks served a purpose. They made the day feel like it had a shape. They made you feel like you hadn't wasted it. They helped with the heavy lunch, and they gave kids something to do without causing trouble. In some families, Sundays also meant visiting. Tea at a relative's house, sitting in a formal front room that wasn't used much in the week, being told to behave, adults talking, kids waiting. And if you've ever heard older Britons say they had a front room that was basically reserved for guests, that's the Sunday vibe. Sunday was when you used the room you didn't normally use. Now let's talk about the emotional side, because that's what makes this video land. 1950s. Britain was a decade of rebuilding, a decade of trying to become normal again, a decade of new hope slowly growing. But it was also a decade of strict social expectations. Respectability mattered. Doing the right thing mattered. Not standing out mattered. And Sunday was the weekly performance of that. Clean clothes, family meal, quiet behaviour, proper routines. In some homes, Sunday could feel like a day when children were seen more clearly, watched more, corrected more, expected more. And that pressure could create a strange childhood memory, a day that looks peaceful in photos, but felt tense inside. Because the home isn't always peaceful just because the street is quiet. Yet, there's another reason people remember Sundays as powerful. They created stability. In a world with fewer choices and fewer distractions, a stable routine can feel like safety. You always knew what Sunday was. You knew the rhythm, you knew the rules, you knew what came next. Modern life is more flexible, but also more chaotic. So when people look back, they sometimes miss the stability even if they don't miss the restrictions. And that's the honest truth. Sundays in 1950s Britain were both. Comfort and constraint, warmth and boredom, family and pressure, ritual and repetition. And that's why they're unforgettable. Because a real Sunday wasn't a day off. It was a weekly pause button that made you feel the shape of your life. It slowed the country down so much that you could hear yourself think. And by the time evening arrived, tea finished, plates cleared, fire still crackling, the street still quiet, there was often one feeling that sat under everything. Tomorrow is Monday. And in 1950s, Britain Monday meant school rules, work rules, authority and routine. So Sunday ended the way it began. Inside the home, under the same roof, with the same family. Only now you could feel the week turning over. Final thought. If you want to understand the 1950s, don't look only at famous moments. Look at the ordinary pause that repeated every 7 days. Because in 1950s, Britain Sunday wasn't just a day, it was a mood.